Welcome to the Political Bridge. I'm Ada, your host. Today we're talking about a very important and complex issue. It's about how our government handles sensitive investigations. Specifically, we're looking at the recent news around the FBI's involvement in the Wuhan lab researcher investigation. This topic brings up big questions about transparency. It also raises concerns about our national security. We need to understand how these two ideas, transparency and national security, can sometimes clash. When the government investigates things like the origins of a global pandemic, people want to know what's happening. But sometimes, keeping information secret is said to protect our country. We'll explore this tension today. We'll hear from Nico, who will share the conservative view. Then Jordan will give us the progressive perspective. Let's get started on this crucial conversation.
Thanks, Ada. The recent reports about the FBI's intervention are deeply troubling. They show a clear lack of transparency. Senator Rand Paul released documents showing the FBI stopped Customs and Border Protection from questioning Peter Daszak. He is a key researcher with ties to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This happened even though CBP saw Daszak as a high person of interest. This FBI intervention in Wuhan lab researcher investigation raises serious questions. It makes you wonder what they were trying to hide. The public has a right to know the full truth about COVID-19's origins. We need to understand the role of U.S. funding in overseas research. When federal agencies block investigations, it erodes public trust. It suggests that certain information is being kept from us. This secrecy harms our national security in the long run. It prevents a full accounting of potential threats. We must demand complete openness from our government. That's the only way to protect our country.
Nico, I understand the desire for transparency, but we must be careful not to jump to conclusions. The FBI's actions, while appearing opaque, could be rooted in protecting ongoing national security operations. These investigations are incredibly sensitive. They often involve complex intelligence gathering. Premature disclosures can compromise sources and methods. It could even endanger people working for our country. The FBI director, Christopher Wray, has said that details about the Wuhan lab origins are classified. He accused China of trying to block efforts to find the truth. This suggests a delicate international situation. The FBI intervention in Wuhan lab researcher investigation might have been a strategic move. It could have been to avoid alerting foreign adversaries. We need to trust our intelligence agencies to make these tough calls. They have access to information we don't. Their job is to keep us safe.
Both of you have highlighted the core tension here. Nico, you argue that transparency builds public trust and is essential for accountability. Jordan, you emphasize the need for secrecy to protect sensitive national security operations. My question for both of you is this: how do we balance these two critical needs? When should the public's right to know take priority? And when should the government's need for secrecy be the deciding factor? This is a difficult line to walk. What specific criteria should we use to make these decisions?
That's a fair question, Ada. Transparency should always be the default, especially when it involves public health. When the government withholds information, it makes people doubt everything. This damages the public trust, which is vital for our country's stability. In cases like the Wuhan lab investigation, the potential for a lab leak affected millions of lives. People lost jobs, businesses, and loved ones. The FBI intervention in Wuhan lab researcher investigation, stopping an interview, just looks bad. It makes people think there's something to hide. We need clear rules that say when secrecy is truly necessary. It should be only for immediate threats to life or ongoing operations that would be totally ruined. Otherwise, the public has a right to all the facts. This helps us make better decisions as a society. It also holds our leaders accountable for their actions.
Nico, I agree that public trust is important. But national security isn't just about immediate threats. It's about long-term protection. Sometimes revealing information too early can damage our ability to gather intelligence in the future. It can expose our methods. It can make it harder to prevent future dangers. The intelligence community has a new understanding. They know too much secrecy can actually hurt national security. But they also believe they can provide more transparency without giving away vital secrets. The FBI intervention in Wuhan lab researcher investigation might have been about protecting sources. It could have to protect methods related to foreign influence. The Chinese government has been accused of trying to hide information. This makes the situation even more delicate. We need to be careful not to make things worse for our intelligence agents.
This brings us to our stress test. Nico, you argue that the FBI's intervention suggests a cover-up and erodes public trust. However, you haven't fully addressed how revealing sensitive intelligence, especially regarding a foreign adversary like China, could directly harm ongoing investigations or U.S. intelligence gathering capabilities. How do you reconcile the need for absolute transparency with the very real risk of compromising national security operations? Jordan, you suggest the FBI's actions were likely to protect sensitive national security interests. Yet, you haven't explained how the public can maintain trust in government agencies when they operate with such a high degree of secrecy. How do we ensure accountability without any visibility into these critical decisions?
Ada, you're right, it's a tough balance. But my point is about the starting position. We should start with transparency, not secrecy. The idea that revealing information always harms national security is often used too broadly. There are ways to share information without giving away classified details. We can release summaries or redacted documents. The public needs assurance that our government isn't hiding wrongdoing. When the FBI intervenes to stop an interview of a key figure, it looks like wrongdoing. This FBI intervention in Wuhan lab researcher investigation makes people lose faith. Losing public trust is a huge national security risk in itself. If people don't trust their government, they won't support its actions. That weakens our country from within. We need our agencies to be open about what they can. This builds trust, which is our strongest defense.
Ada, I understand the concern about public trust. It's a valid point. However, the intelligence community has made efforts to increase transparency. They aim to do this without harming national security. They recognize that excessive secrecy can be costly. But there are times when full disclosure is simply not possible. Imagine if we revealed every detail of how we track foreign spies. Those methods would become useless. The FBI intervention in Wuhan lab researcher investigation could be exactly that kind of situation. China is known for its lack of transparency in research. They actively try to steal intellectual property. Releasing details prematurely could have allowed China to cover its tracks. It could have exposed our intelligence assets. We need to trust that there are checks and balances in place. We must believe they are making the best decisions for our safety.
This stress test reveals the fundamental conflict. Nico, you highlight the danger of eroding public trust through secrecy. You argue that it undermines the very foundation of our democracy. Jordan, you point to the practical dangers of compromising sensitive intelligence operations. You suggest that premature disclosure could empower our adversaries. Both of you make strong cases. It shows us that there's no easy answer here. We're weighing two vital principles: the public's right to know and the government's duty to protect. The challenge is finding the right balance in a world with complex threats.
Ultimately, a government that operates in the shadows cannot truly serve its people. The FBI intervention in Wuhan lab researcher investigation is a prime example. It created more questions than answers. It fueled suspicion. We saw this with the initial downplaying of the lab leak theory. Now, even the FBI believes a lab leak is likely. This shift in understanding shows why transparency is so crucial. If we had more openness from the start, we might have understood the pandemic's origins sooner. We could have prevented further spread. We need strong oversight of our intelligence agencies. This includes clear rules for when they can withhold information. Without it, the temptation to hide mistakes or avoid political fallout becomes too great. Our national security depends on a well-informed and trusting public.
Nico, while I agree that transparency is important, we can't ignore the realities of global threats. Our adversaries like China exploit any weakness they find. They are not playing by the same rules of openness. The FBI intervention in Wuhan lab researcher investigation might have been a necessary evil. It could have protected our ability to counter foreign influence. The government has a duty to protect its citizens. Sometimes that means making tough choices about what information can be shared. The intelligence community is working towards more transparency, but they must do it in a way that doesn't compromise their mission. We need to support their efforts to keep us safe. We must also push for more oversight, but we cannot demand complete openness at the expense of our national security. That would be a dangerous mistake.
Jordan, I hear your point about protecting sources and methods, but let's look at the specific context here. Peter Daszak. This wasn't some shadowy operative. He was a public figure, president of EcoHealth Alliance, with well-documented ties to the Wuhan Institute of Virology and NIH-funded gain-of-function research. Customs and Border Protection flagged him as an extremely high person of interest and prepared a formal tactical terrorism response team examination. They wanted to ask if he was carrying biological samples. The FBI's intervention wasn't just about protecting intelligence. It actively prevented a federal agency from conducting a crucial border security check on a person of immense public health interest. This looks less like strategic protection and more like an attempt to control the narrative or shield certain individuals from scrutiny. The public has a right to know why a border agency was told to stand down on such a critical matter, especially when Daszak was later debarred from federal funding.
Nico, the fact that CBP flagged Daszak as a high person of interest and prepared a detailed examination package actually reinforces my argument. It indicates that multiple agencies were aware of the sensitivities surrounding him and his work. The FBI's request to stand down, while seemingly counterintuitive, could have been a calculated decision to avoid jeopardizing a much larger, more complex investigation into foreign state actors. Imagine if a public interrogation at the border tipped off a foreign government, allowing them to destroy evidence or compromise ongoing intelligence operations related to the pandemic's origins. The intelligence community operates with a broader, strategic view, often connecting seemingly disparate pieces of information. The debarment of Daszak later on doesn't necessarily mean the FBI's initial action was wrong. It could mean that their intelligence gathering eventually led to that administrative action. These agencies are constantly balancing immediate tactical concerns with long-term strategic objectives, and sometimes that means making unpopular decisions that appear opaque in the short term.
And that brings us to the end of another insightful discussion on the political bridge. Nico and Jordan have given us much to consider. The tension between transparency and national security is a constant challenge for any democracy. It's a balance that requires ongoing debate and careful thought. We hope this conversation has shed some light on the complexities involved. Thank you for joining us. You can find more information and resources at tpbridgepod.com. Join us next time for another engaging discussion. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep bridging those political divides.